Hi everyone, I'm Daniel Roth. I'm a product manager on the ASP.NET team. And in this session, we're gonna go from web to native with .NET MAUI and Blazor. Now, .NET MAUI isn't just for native client developers. If you're a .NET web developer, you can use .NET MAUI and Blazor together to build native client apps too. Blazor is integrated into .NET MAUI so that you can get the best of both a native client app and the web. .NET MAUI loves Blazor. Now, if you're a native client developer, Blazor has a lot of benefits for you too. Blazor is a web UI framework based on .NET and C# so that you can build modern full-stack web applications without having to use JavaScript. Blazor is based on purely open web standards, and it works in every modern web browser. Blazor lets you build full-stack web apps using just your .NET skills, your .NET tools, and your .NET code. And you can do that and get a great, rich, interactive web development experience. Blazor is part of ASP.NET Core, your complete web framework for .NET. With the addition of Blazor to ASP.NET Core, you have everything you need to build modern web applications. ASP.NET Core and Blazor are supported as part of the modern .NET platform, including the recent .NET 6 long-term support release. Now, how does Blazor work? How do you get Blazor on the web? Well, Blazor is a component-based UI framework. Blazor components are little pieces of web UI that encapsulate their rendering logic, any state that they need, and any UI event handling logic that they have. As the components render, Blazor then keeps track of what needs to be updated in the user interface, and then it very precisely and exactly updates the browser DOM with just the changes that need to be done. So then you can take your Blazor components and you can actually host them on the web in one of two different ways. The first way we call Blazor Server. In a Blazor Server application, your components actually are running from the server, but they handle all UI interactions and UI updates over a real-time connection with the browser. Blazor Server apps load fast, and they can really simplify your app architecture because all your code is still running from the server environment. But at the same time, you still get that rich, interactive web UI experience that's characteristic of a JavaScript-based web application. Alternatively, you can host your Blazor components client-side in the browser using Blazor WebAssembly. In a Blazor WebAssembly app, you actually download your Blazor components to the browser along with a WebAssembly-based .NET runtime that executes your components and all of your .NET code right there directly in the browser. Blazor WebAssembly apps are true client-side browser-based applications, so they can be deployed as simple, low-cost static websites, and they can even run offline, like a progressive web app or PWA. When you combine Blazor WebAssembly with an ASP.NET Core backend, you now have that full-stack .NET web development experience. So Blazor and ASP.NET Core have everything you need to build modern web applications. But what if the web platform just isn't enough for your scenario? What if you need access to full native device capabilities? Well, we've been working on expanding Blazor beyond the web. And earlier this year, we shipped support for using Blazor to build native desktop and mobile applications using a new component hosting model that we call Blazor Hybrid. Now, what is Blazor Hybrid? Well, Blazor Hybrid apps are native client apps where you take your Blazor components and you package them with the app, and they run natively on the device along with the rest of your .NET code. They then render to an embedded web view control that is also included with the application. So everything's local, everything's running on a native .NET runtime. WebAssembly is not involved. And the benefit of this setup is that you can reuse and share your existing Blazor web UI components within a native client app and still have full access to native device capabilities. And of course, the best way to build a Blazor hybrid app is with .NET MAUI. .NET MAUI has Blazor hybrid support built into the framework. You can take your Blazor components and embed them in a .NET MAUI app. This means that you can use .NET MAUI and Blazor together to target mobile, desktop, and web with one Web UI-based implementation. You can also then take advantage of .NET MAUI features like leverage native UI elements alongside your Blazor Web UI, or also call into native device functionality through normal .NET APIs. Let's take a look at what it looks like to build a .NET MAUI Blazor app. We're going to head over now to Visual Studio. Now, of course, to get started with .NET MAUI, you're going to need to have the .NET MAUI workload installed in Visual Studio. I've already done that, and because of that, you can see I get these templates, and one of them right here, lo and behold, is the .NET MAUI Blazor app template. Now, this is just a normal .NET MAUI app like the one above it. There's the normal .NET MAUI app template, but it's already pre-set up to be able to host Blazor components right in the application. Okay, so let's go ahead and we would go ahead and create one of these. I've already got one created, so I'm gonna close this and just go to my app that I've already got set up, already deployed. And this is what the project looks like when you've gone ahead and created it. So we get a single MAUI app project with Blazor set up, and then this project is set up now to, of course, target Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android, all 4 platforms with one project. And I've already got it running right here. Like here's it running on Windows. This is a native Windows desktop app based off of WinUI 3 and also the Windows App SDK, but it's hosting our Blazor components right inside of it. And then alongside of it, we've also got, here's Android. This is our .NET MAUI Blazor app running on an Android device as well. One project using WebUI to target mobile and desktop. Now we can see that this is really WebUI. If we hit F12, that should bring up the browser dev tools. There they are. And these are the browser dev tools for the little WebView control that's sitting in each of these apps. In this case, the Windows app is using WebView 2. And if we look at the elements and we just hover around a little bit, we can see all the HTML elements showing up in the browser dev tools. So this is really a hybrid of WebUI and native UI all within one application. Now, how does this all work? How's the project set up? Let's go take a look at the code. So for this .NET MAUI app, the main page of the app is defined in this main page.xaml page, and that's what we have up here. Now this is XAML. If you're a web developer, don't freak out. There's very little XAML actually in this app. All we have is a single .NET MAUI native control, which is this Blazor WebView control. Now what this control does is it sets up the WebView, appropriate WebView control for each of the platforms you're going to run on, and then it also sets up hosting the Blazor components in the app so they can then talk to that WebView over a little local interop channel. Okay, so we got one MAUI control. That's it. That's the one piece of XAML that we're going to use in this app. Now, the initial page that gets loaded into that WebView control is this host page, so index.html. That's over here in the www root folder. We can take a look at that real quick. It's just a single static HTML page. At the bottom, you can see where the Blazor WebView JavaScript framework file is being loaded. And then we have this div up above, which has ID app. And that's where we're going to load our root component for this application. The root components are configured here in XAML. We just have one in this application. Here's the selector saying that I want to actually render to that div. And then here's the specific Blazor component that we want to render into the app. And it's this main component. This is the syntax you use in XAML for specifying a CLR type. Now, where is main defined? Well, over here in main.razor, of course, Blazor components are all defined in Razor files, which is a mixture of HTML and C#. Let's go ahead and open that up. Here's main.razor. Now this is the Blazor router component. What the router component does is it takes care of handling any browser navigations, intercepting them, and then rendering the corresponding component that has that route. Okay, so every Blazor app has this. If you had a Blazor web app, you would have exactly this same file living in your application as well. And then we have all of our actual component pages, which are defined up here above. And there's the 3 standard Blazor components that we put in every Blazor project template: counter, fetch data, and index. Those are the 3 components that we're seeing here in the app. So this home page, that's just a piece of static HTML. We got the counter with the button that we can click and the count goes up, all done with HTML and C#. And then a little table generated from some randomly generated weather forecast data. So we can see the components for each of those up above in the project. Here's the index page, just some static HTML with its route, and then a Blazor component for setting up that little survey prompt alert there in the middle. We have the counter page. Here's counter, again, a route, HTML, and then now we have a little bit of UI event handling. We've got the on-click event that we're hooking for this button so that every time it runs, we run our C# code, which increments this field, and then the component re-renders, and that's how we're getting this counter experience. And then lastly, fetch data. Here's the fetch data component. This is using dependency injection to get this weather forecast service that we're going to use to get our weather forecast data. That could be, calling an API. In this case, it's just using a little bit of in-memory logic to generate the weather. Below, we have some HTML to generate the table. We've got a normal C# for each loop to just loop over every weather forecast to render every table row. And then at the bottom, we have the uninitialized component lifecycle method. That's the first thing that runs for the component, and that's what actually retrieves the data from the weather forecast service so that the component can then render. So that's how we're getting Blazor inside of our .NET MAUI native client app for mobile and desktop. Super cool. Okay, so that means we now have a mixture of web UI and native, so we should be able to start taking advantage of native client features. For example, we don't just have to have web UI. If we want to take advantage of native UI elements, we can do that too. For example, maybe instead of this HTML-based left nav bar, maybe we want to actually use a native tab view control from the underlying platform. So we get that native look and feel for that particular part of the UI. You can use as much native UI or web UI as you want. So let's give that a try. Let's go into mainpage.xaml. Now, because this is native UI, we write this part in XAML. So this is going to be a little bit of XAML code, but it's not too bad. So instead of a content page, let's switch this now to a tabbed page. That looks good. And then I think we have to change that in one more place because this XAML file has a code behind file, which is a partial class which derives from the same base type. So we'll go ahead and fix that up too. Okay, so now we've got a tabbed page, sorry. And it's complaining because it's saying, tab views need to have content pages inside of them. So let's go ahead and add a content page right here. And we'll wrap our Blazor web view control. And we'll just format that so it looks nice. We're going to give each content page can have a title, so it shows up in the tab. We'll set the title of this one to be home. And then what we want to do now is instead of rendering the main component, which has the Blazor router and is handling all the tabs, we just want to render the specific page for this tab. So I want to render like the index component here. To do that, I'm going to set up another namespace up above, XML_NS, and I'm going to call it pages. And this will be the pages namespace where all of our Blazor components are being generated right now. Okay? And then let's just change local.main to pages index. Just that easy. Okay, so that's one of our 3 tabs. Let's go ahead and copy this. And we'll add 2 more tabs. This first one's going to be for the counter. And we'll add counter right here as well for the counter component. And then the last one will be, we'll call this one weather, and this will be our fetch data component. Okay, so we've got 3 tabs. I think that's all set up nicely. Let's go ahead and run this. We'll run it on Windows first. We'll go ahead and run that. Now it takes a minute or 2 for it to build and actually redeploy the application. So we'll just let that go. But what we should expect is instead of having the purple gradient-based, bootstrap-styled left nav bar, hopefully we'll get a Windows client app with a native tab view using the look and feel of the whatever platform you're running on. Because we're using native UI controls, these controls should look like Windows UI controls, whatever comes with WinUI 3 by default, essentially out of the box. Looks like that deploy succeeded. And so now we're just waiting for the app to pop up. There it is. Okay, so here's our Blazor hybrid app. But now instead of having that left nav, we've now got these tabs up at the top. These are native WinUI 3 elements. We can click on them and we see our different pages. The counter, of course, still works. But we're now having a mixture of native UI and web UI. Let's do this for Android as well, because I want you to see that it looks a little different on Android because you're going to get the Android look and feel. Android takes a second as well for it to build and run. So this is really nice that if there's like a particular control that's specific to a platform or has a particular UI experience that you just want to reuse instead of having to try and recreate that, using web technologies, then you can just use that native control. You have the flexibility to do that. Okay, so there's the app, it's restarting, and now we're running on Android. And give me a second to start up. Emulator's taking us just a second, and there it is. So we got home, counter, and weather. Of course, this has a the sort of material design look and feel because we're using the native controls from Android. Okay, so we get native UI and web UI. We can use both thanks to .NET MAUI and Blazor together. We can, of course, also leverage native platform functionality. Like if we want to call into the device to get the geolocation or the network connectivity, we can do that too. So let's go into index.razor and let's add a button right here. And this button, let's say it's going to check the network. Okay, so that's just an HTML button. And then what I want below is to have a code block with a method that's like, check internet that will handle actually calling into MAUI APIs to check the internet. Now I'm going to save a little typing. We've got a little snippet set up down here that I'm just going to grab and use that so that I don't have to type this completely on the fly. And there we go. So this is the method that I think we want. There it is. So check internet. Now this method is using this connectivity API from MAUI. So there it is, MAUI networking connectivity. This is a cross-platform API for checking the status of the network on any of the platforms MAUI supports. We're also querying for the type of network connection that we currently have, again, using those APIs. And then down below, we're going to create a native alert dialog to show what is the, whether we have network or not, and then what is the type of network that we currently have. Okay, and then I think I need to wire this method up. So I want, whenever this button is clicked, I want that check internet method to be called. So let's do on click right here, just like we saw in the counter component, and we want to call check internet. Perfect. All right, I think that's it. And I'm going to deploy this to Android, because on Android, because we're using the emulator, we can actually like change the status of the network without losing any connection on the machine. So there it goes. Cool, it's pretty quick. All right, so now we have this check network button, and if I click that, there it says, yes, we do have internet, and the current type of internet that the emulator is emulating is Wi-Fi, and this is a native pop-up, so again, native UI mixed with web UI. That's great. Now if we go into the emulator settings, let's pull this down, go into internet, and then instead of having Wi-Fi on, let's turn that off. And then now if we check the network status, has internet equals false. And of course the type is unknown because we don't have any internet at all. Okay, so that's how you can call into native device functionality as well. Pretty cool. All right, now we've seen how we can use our web development skills to build native client apps. We've seen how we can leverage native client functionality, native UI, native APIs. But what's really cool about this setup is now we can actually share this web UI logic with our web applications. Like if we started with a web app and want to turn it into a native client app, we can just grab the Blazor components from that web app and use them in .NET MAUI, and vice versa. So let's, I think we're done with this project. Let's go ahead and close this. And now I'm going to go over to this other project that I've already got set up. This is the .NET Podcast sample app. This is a sample app that's publicly available on GitHub that you can go look at. And it implements a podcast client in a number of different ways. One of the ways is it implements it using a web application, using ASP.NET Core and Blazor. So that's this podcast.server and podcast.client projects up here in the Solution Explorer. So this is the ASP.NET Core part, and then podcast.client, this is actually a Blazor WebAssembly app, so it's going to run client-side in the browser. All right, so let's go ahead and run this and see if we can see the web version of this application. So this home page is all server rendered. This is ASP.NET Core Razor pages that's rendering this page. But if we go into the podcast player, everything here is implemented using Blazor WebAssembly. So we get this rich interactive UI experience. We can search for podcasts and search for MAUI-based ones, of course. Here's a MAUI podcast. We get playback. Hopefully you can hear that. Sounds great. All right, and then we can like say, oh, that sounded awesome. Let me pause it. Let's listen to that later. We can put it on our listen later list, and it shows up over here in the listen later list. If we decide not to listen to it later, we can remove it. We can change our settings so that the theme is light mode or dark mode, or use the system theme. We've got a rich interactive UI experience, all as a web application implemented with Blazor components. Okay. Now, but let's say we decided, we really want a native client experience for this .NET Podcast app. Maybe we want to be in the different stores, or maybe we want to actually leverage native device capabilities that's tricky to do on the web. No problem. So let's add a .NET MAUI Blazor app to this solution. So I'm going to right-click up here, and I have an existing project that I've already set up for this. Where's that? Add existing project, and this is part of the sample application on GitHub as well, so you can play around with this. So I'm going to add this project. Cool. So now we have a .NET MAUI project in our solution. Let's switch to that to be the one we're going to run. And we should now be able to run on Windows or on Android. Let's start with Windows. I think we can close our previous application that we were playing around with. No longer need that. This should just take a second while it builds and it deploys the app. Now, I didn't point this out, but this .NET MAUI Blazor app for our podcast app, if we look at mainpage.xaml, it has exactly the same XAML as we saw before. It's just a single Blazor web view control pointing to the main component, which will route to our pages. But all of the pages for this app, if we look at its dependencies, they're actually coming from this podcast.pages project, which is this same project down here below where all the pages for our Blazor application live. So we're literally reusing the same binary, the same code in both the .NET MAUI app and the Blazor app. Okay, so there it is. So now we have a native Windows desktop app for our .NET Podcast application. Exact same UI as we saw in our web app. See, here's the web one. You barely can tell them apart. Okay, so there's Windows. Now we can also do Android as well. So let's switch over to Android. All right, and we'll get that running there too. So we've got Windows, we've got web, and then if we just give it a second, hopefully this will start quick. We also should have mobile. So mobile, desktop, and web, all with one UI set of controls. It looks like it's actually might be trying to, oh, there it goes. Okay, I was worried it was trying to do a full rebuild for some reason, but now it's deploying to the emulator. Exciting, there it is. So we now have all three form factors, if you will, for apps handled by one code base: .NET Podcast on mobile, .NET Podcast on web, and .NET Podcast on desktop as well, mobile, desktop, and web. Super duper cool. So one set of web UI components. Now, what's really neat is that we didn't just reuse the web UI components in this app. We also integrated with native device functionality. So if we go look at how this .NET Podcast app was implemented, like down here in mauiprogram.cs, if we scroll down a bit, where it's configuring its services, you can see there are these various iNative audio service implementations that are being added for each of the 4 platforms that MAUI supports: Android, Windows, iOS, and Mac. So we've got native audio playback happening for each of these devices. We can actually take a look at this. If I pull in the other project, let me add, I think it's in a separate library, but it's pretty quick to find. So in this lib folder, we have this shared MAUI lib where all those implementations are we're done. And if we F12 on this, here's the actual Android audio playback. If we hover over the media player, we can see, yeah, this is calling into Android APIs for doing the audio playback on Android. Super duper cool. Okay, so that's .NET MAUI and Blazor together, web UI and native, all in the same application. Now, Blazor Hybrid isn't just for .NET MAUI applications. Blazor Hybrid works in any application that can run .NET code and that you can then render to some web view control. If you have a web view control available in .NET, you can do Blazor Hybrid. This can be really useful if you want to take an existing .NET app and modernize it to have a web-based UI. Maybe you want that UI to work now cross-platform in a .NET MAUI application, or maybe you want it to now function on the web. This app that you see here is a legacy point of sale application for dry cleaning businesses. And the company that built this completely redid the UI using Blazor. There's a spot from Spot by Explorer. And that enabled them to take their existing application and move it to the web. So we have introduced not only Blazor hybrid support for .NET MAUI, but we also have Blazor WebView controls for WPF in WinForms so that you can use Blazor to modernize your existing Windows desktop apps. Let me show you that real quick. I'm going to hop back over to Visual Studio, and then let's open up this. Let's look at WPF first. So here's a Blazor hybrid WPF application. So this is a WPF project. As soon as it comes up, there it is. And it has this main window.xaml. So it's still XAML. It's not MAUI XAML. It's WPF XAML. But down here below, you can see that there is a Blazor WebView control that you can get from NuGet as a NuGet package. And if we go ahead and run this, we now have a WPF application, which hopefully should show our Blazor UI. There it is. So that's WPF with Blazor. And then if we go over here, we should be able to see Blazor WinForms as well. So if we go over to this other project. All right, so now we have a WinForms project. WinForms doesn't have XAML, but we have the forms designer. If we go look at the designer and see what this app has set up, just give it a second to load, then we can see that it should just have a single WinForms control, which is kind of looked a little wonky there. Not sure what's going on there, but if we look at its properties, we can see that that WinForms control is also a Blazor WebView control. So we have a Blazor WebView control hosted in WinForms. I don't know what's going on with the WinForms designer. It's kind of a little crazy. But that's okay. There's our WinForms app. So we've got WinForms and WPF also hosting Blazor components too. Great way to modernize existing apps. All right, so let me go back to slides for a second. All right. Now that we're done with shipping Blazor hybrid support for WPF and WinForms and .NET MAUI, we're of course shifting our attention to shipping a bunch of new Blazor improvements in .NET 7. We've got loads of new stuff that are already available with the latest .NET 7 previews, like .NET 7 Preview 7, which just went out today, hot reload improvements, improved ahead of time compilation performance, expanded web crypto support, binding improvements, virtualization improvements, and much more. We've also got still a lot more to come in .NET 7. We're not done yet. .NET 7 ships later this year, and we've got a whole bunch of new Blazor features that are coming as well. You should check out the latest details in the ASP.NET Core and Blazor roadmap at aka.ms/ASP.NET/roadmap. I hope you enjoyed learning about .NET MAUI in Blazor. There's tons of resources that you can use on the web to help you get started. Give it a try and let us know what you think.